The plants were dying, and Penelope Everhart had exactly 3 hours to find anyone who wouldn't kill them faster. She stood in her apartment doorway at 11 at night, suitcase packed, research permits printed, and absolutely no plan for the dozen green lives scattered across her windowsills and shelves. The expedition to document medicinal flora in the Carpathian Highlands had been approved 6 months ago. She'd had half a year to arrange care for her plants, and somehow she'd convinced herself she could do it the morning of departure. Stupid, she muttered, pressing her palms against her eyes. Monumentally stupid. Her phone lay useless on the counter. She had already scrolled through every contact twice. Her lab partner was allergic. Her sister lived 4 states away. The building superintendent had once referred to her pathos as those green things with such disdain that Penelope had never asked him for anything again. That left exactly one option, and it was the worst option, which was why she'd been standing in her doorway for 20 minutes trying to talk herself into it. Her neighbor across the hall. She'd lived in the building for 8 months and had spoken to him exactly 4 times, each conversation leaving her more unsettled than the last. Not because he was rude, quite the opposite. He was unfailingly polite, soft-spoken, and courteous in a way that felt like it belonged in a different century. He dressed like he was attending a funeral at an opera house, all dark fabrics and careful tailoring. His hair was so pale it looked white under the hallway lights, and his skin had the kind of translucent quality that made her suspect he'd never seen the sun. The first time they'd met, he'd helped her carry groceries up the stairs at 2 in the morning, asking nothing, saying little, disappearing back into his apartment before she could even thank him properly. The second time, she'd locked herself out, and he'd waited with her in the hallway for 3 hours until the locksmith arrived, discussing the etymology of botanical Latin names with the kind of effortless knowledge that suggested he'd learned them when they were still in common use. The third time, she'd knocked on his door at dawn because someone was screaming in the building, only to find him already dressed, already calm, already moving past her to investigate with the fluid certainty of someone who did not expect the world to surprise him. The fourth time, just last week, they'd shared the elevator in silence until he'd noticed the scrape on her hand from a thorn and offered her a handkerchief embroidered with initials she couldn't read, watching her with dark eyes that seemed much older than his face. His name was Quillan, or at least that's what the mailbox said. No last name, just Quillan, in elegant script on the label. Penelope had spent 8 months carefully not thinking too hard about her neighbor, because thinking too hard led to questions like, why does he only leave at night, and why have I never seen him in daylight, and why does he move like gravity works differently for him? And those questions led nowhere good. But her plants were dying, and he was the only person in this building who'd ever shown her kindness without wanting something in return. She knocked on his door before she could reconsider. Silence answered, stretching long enough that she'd started to turn away when the door opened. Quillan stood in the doorway, backlit by warm lamplight, wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows and an expression of polite inquiry. Up close, his features had that same timeless quality as his manner, elegant bones, a mouth that suggested he smiled often but not carelessly, and those unsettling dark eyes that seemed to catch and hold every detail of her face. "Miss Everhart," he said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered, low and careful and faintly accented in a way she'd never been able to place. "It's quite late. Is something wrong?" "I need help," Penelope said, and the words came out more desperately than she'd intended. "I know this is going to sound insane, and I know we barely know each other, but I'm leaving for Romania in 3 hours, and I have no one else to ask, and I will pay you. I'll pay you whatever you want. I just—" He raised one pale hand, gentle but firm. "Breathe," he said. "Start from the beginning." So she did, standing in his doorway, explaining about the expedition and the plants and the catastrophic failure of planning that had led her here. He listened without interrupting, his attention so complete it felt like being studied under laboratory light, and when she finally ran out of words, he was quiet for a long moment. "You want me to water your plants," he said slowly, as if testing the words for hidden meaning. "Yes, I know it sounds ridiculous. It doesn't." He tilted his head slightly, something shifting in his expression that might have been amusement. "You're asking me to care for living things that matter to you. It's not ridiculous. That's trust." Penelope blinked. "I'm asking you to pour water on some dirt." Are you? His mouth curved, just barely. I've seen you carry those plants home from the market. I've heard you talking to them through the door. You don't believe they're just dirt any more than I do. Heat crept up her neck. You can hear through the door? Old building, he said, which wasn't really an answer. Thin walls. She should leave. She should make an excuse and back away and never speak to this strange, too observant man again. Instead, she heard herself say, "So you'll do it?" Quillan was quiet again, his gaze moving past her to the door of her apartment, considering something she couldn't name. When he looked back, his expression had settled into something serious and oddly formal. "I would be honored," he said, and he meant it. She could hear that he meant it, which made no sense at all. "Show me what they need." She led him into her apartment, suddenly aware of how small and cluttered it looked through a stranger's eyes. Plants crowded every surface succulence on the bookshelf, ferns hanging from ceiling hooks, a massive monstera taking up half the living room window. The air smelled like soil and green growth, and her research papers covered the kitchen table in careful chaos. Quillan stopped just inside the door, his gaze sweeping the space with that same intense attention he'd given her. "How many?" he asked quietly. 37, Penelope admitted. "I know that's a lot. It's a forest," he said, and there was something in his voice she couldn't identify, something almost like reverence. "You've built a forest in a city apartment." He moved to the nearest window, where her collection of medicinal plants lived in neat ceramic pots. His fingers brushed the leaves of her valerian with startling gentleness, and she noticed his hands were as pale as his face, long-fingered and careful. "This one," he said, not looking at her. "Tell me about this one." "Valerian root, used for sleep aids and anxiety treatment. That one's temperamental, likes moisture, but not wet soil, indirect light, needs pruning every few weeks or it gets leggy." He nodded slowly, then moved to the next. "And this?" She walked him through her entire collection, plant by plant, explaining watering schedules and light requirements and the specific quirks of each species. He asked questions that suggested he actually understood botanical care, not just the basics, but the nuances of soil pH and humidity levels and seasonal dormancy cycles. Once, when she mentioned that her chamomile needed deadheading, he demonstrated the proper technique without being asked, his movements precise and practiced. "You've done this before," Penelope said, watching him. "A long time ago." His expression went distant. "I used to tend gardens, before." "Before what?" He didn't answer, moving instead to the last plant on her list, the one she'd almost forgotten to mention. It sat alone on a high shelf, a small, unassuming specimen with silver-green leaves and a single bud that hadn't bloomed in the 2 years she'd owned it. "That's my problem, child," Penelope said. "I don't even know what species it is. Found it growing wild during a field study in the Balkans 3 years ago. It should have died a dozen times by now, but it just keeps surviving, barely. I've tried everything, different soils, different watering schedules, grow lights, darkness, warmth, cold. Nothing makes it thrive. Nothing kills it. It just exists." Quillan had gone very still. He stared at the plant with an intensity that made the air feel heavy, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Where exactly did you find this?" "Old monastery ruins in the mountains. Why?" He reached for the pot with both hands, cradling it like something precious, and Penelope saw his fingers tremble slightly against the ceramic. "May I move it while you're gone? Keep it in my apartment?" "Why would you? Please." He looked at her, and his eyes were black in the lamplight, fathomless and urgent. "I can help it. I know what it needs, but I need to take it with me." Every instinct told her to say no, to ask more questions, to demand explanations. But she'd spent 3 years watching that plant refuse to die and refuse to live, and something in his face told her he was telling the truth. "Okay," she said, "but you have to promise you'll take care of the others too." "I swear it," Quillan said, formal as an oath. "I will guard them as if they were the crown jewels themselves. You have my word." She laughed because the image of her scraggly spider plants as crown jewels was too absurd. "I'll hold you to that." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his severe features into something warm and almost playful. "You should. I take my vows very seriously." She gave him her spare key, wrote out care instructions for the more delicate specimens, and tried not to think about how strange this all was. At the door, she turned back to find him already moving through her apartment, studying each plant with focused attention. "Thank you," she said. "Really, you're saving my life here." Quillan looked up, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Safe travels, Miss Everhart. I'll keep your forest alive." The expedition was supposed to last 3 weeks, but stretched to 5 when they discovered an entire valley of undocumented medicinal plants that needed cataloging. Penelope spent her days hiking mountain trails and her nights pressing specimens, and she thought about her plants exactly twice: once when she found a wild relative of her mystery species growing in a cave, and once when a sudden storm made her worry about her leaky kitchen window. She didn't think about Quillan at all, except when she did, which was more often than she wanted to admit. She'd remember the way he'd touched her valerian leaves, or the tremor in his voice when he'd asked about the mystery plant, or the formal gravity with which he'd accepted her trust, and she'd wonder what kind of person treated plant sitting like a sacred duty. By the time she made it back to her apartment building, she was exhausted, sunburned, and carrying enough documentation to fuel a year of research. It was 3 in the morning when she dragged her suitcase up the stairs, and her only thought was sleep. The hallway was dark except for a soft glow coming from under her door. Penelope froze, key in hand. She'd definitely turned off all the lights. She'd checked twice. She unlocked the door slowly, easing it open, and stopped breathing. Her apartment was filled with vampires, 3 of them, pale and elegant and absolutely inhuman, standing in her living room like marble statues. 2 more sat at her kitchen table, reviewing papers covered in dense handwriting. A 6th stood by her window, backlit by grow lights that definitely hadn't been there before, monitoring equipment that looked like it belonged in a laboratory. And in the center of it all, standing beside her monstera like a general surveying troops, was Quillan. He'd changed his clothes black now, formal, with a high collar that made him look like he'd stepped out of a historical portrait, but his expression was exactly the same as she remembered, focused and serious and somehow fond. He was holding a moisture meter and making notes in a leather-bound journal, and he didn't notice her until one of the vampires by the table said quietly, "My lord, the guardian has returned." Every head turned toward her. 6 pairs of eyes, all that same fathomless black, fixed on her with predatory stillness. Quillan's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, delight, and something that might have been embarrassment. He set down his journal with careful precision. "Miss Everhart," he said, and his voice carried an edge of forced calm. "You're back early." Penelope looked at the vampires, looked at the monitoring equipment, looked at the clipboard hanging beside her ficus with what appeared to be an hourly watering log, looked back at Quillan. "What the hell is this?" "I can explain. Are those grow lights? Industrial grow lights? Your begonias were struggling with the natural light exposure. Is that a humidity gauge? A professional one? The ferns required specific atmospheric conditions. Why are there 6 vampires in my apartment?" The room went very quiet. Quillan cleared his throat. "Technically, I believe you mean 7 vampires, including myself." "Oh, great, wonderful. That makes it so much better." Penelope dropped her suitcase and pressed her hands to her temples. "I asked you to water my plants." "I did water your plants," Quillan said, defensive now. "I watered them precisely according to your specifications. I also monitored their soil composition, adjusted their light exposure, implemented a rotation schedule to ensure even growth, and established a watch system to respond to any signs of distress." A watch system. "They're living beings under my protection. Of course I established a watch." One of the vampires by the window, a woman with silver hair braided down her back, spoke up in a heavily accented voice. "The coleus began to wilt on the 4th night. His Majesty detected it within minutes. We adjusted the watering schedule immediately." "His Majesty?" Penelope repeated slowly. Quillan shot the woman a look that could have cut glass. "Not helpful, Seraphine. You told me you were honored to water my plants. I am. You didn't mention you were a king." "You didn't ask," Quillan said, then winced. I apologize. That was flippant. You deserve a better explanation." "You think?" He gestured to the other vampires, a motion that somehow conveyed both command and dismissal. They moved toward the door with fluid synchronization, each of them nodding to Penelope as they passed. The last one out, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20 when he was turned, paused to point at her snake plant. The third leaf from the left is developing brown edges, he said seriously. We've been monitoring it. Might be overwatering. Then they were gone, and she was alone with the vampire king who'd turned her apartment into a botanical fortress. Quillan set down his moisture meter and turned to face her fully, his posture straight and formal. In the grow lights, his white hair seemed to shine, and his dark eyes held something between apology and defiance. I should have told you what I was, he said quietly. But you were desperate and I was... He paused, searching for words. I wanted you to trust me, and I thought if you knew, you wouldn't. So you just decided to hide the fact that you're vampire royalty? I don't lead the way I used to. I haven't in a long time. I prefer to live quietly now, without the weight of crowns and councils. His mouth curved slightly. Though I admit my court found my current assignment somewhat unusual. Your current assignment. Guarding your plants. He said it without irony, like it was the most natural thing in the world. They thought I was being eccentric. I believe the word obsessive was used more than once. Penelope looked around her apartment again. The equipment, the logs, the evidence of 5 weeks of meticulous, overwhelming care. You built a greenhouse attachment on my fire escape. Your desert roses needed more direct sunlight than the window could provide. There's a humidifier system built into my bathroom. The orchids required tropical conditions. You color-coded my watering cans. Different species require different water temperatures and mineral contents. Standardization prevents contamination. She should be furious. She should throw him out and never speak to him again, and definitely not trust him with anything more important than a plastic cactus. Instead, she found herself walking to her kitchen table, pulling out a chair, and sitting down before her legs gave out. Why, she asked. Why go to all this trouble for some houseplants belonging to a neighbor you barely know? Quillan was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved to sit across from her, folding his hands on the table with careful precision. Up close, she could see the faint circles under his eyes, like even vampires could look tired. I'm 843 years old, he said softly. I've lived through empires rising and falling. I've watched cities burn and forests die, and everything I ever planted turned to dust. His fingers tightened against each other. I stopped trying to grow things around the time I stopped being entirely human. It hurt too much, loving something that would wither while I remained. Penelope's throat tightened. And then you knocked on my door at midnight, asking me to care for the small green lives you'd built, and you trusted me with them. He met her eyes, and his gaze was raw. I couldn't remember the last time someone trusted me with something living, something fragile. So I swore I wouldn't fail. I swore I would keep them alive, all of them, no matter what it took. Even if it meant building a greenhouse, even if it meant building a forest. She should say something. Thank him, probably, or tell him he was insane, or ask more questions about the Vampire King thing. Instead, she heard herself say, "Did you figure out what's wrong with my mystery plant?" Quillan's expression shifted, that same intensity from before returning to his features. May I show you? He led her to his apartment across the hall, and Penelope stepped into a space that looked like it had been transported from another century. Heavy curtains blocked every window. Dark wood furniture sat arranged with geometric precision. Books lined the walls, actual old books, leather-bound and gilt-edged, and the air smelled like parchment, and something else, something green and growing. The mystery plant sat on a table in the center of the room, and Penelope stopped breathing for the second time that night. It was blooming. Not just blooming, thriving. The stems had doubled in size, the silver-green leaves spreading wide and healthy, and from the center rose a single flower unlike anything she'd ever seen. Pale petals that seemed to shimmer in the lamplight, unfurling in a complex spiral pattern that hurt to look at too long. The scent was subtle, almost medicinal, familiar in a way she couldn't place. "What is it?" she whispered. "Moonvein," Quillan said, his voice reverent. "That's what my people called it before it went extinct. Or we thought it went extinct. It only grows in places of old blood, old death. It needs darkness and..." He paused. "It needs to be watered with vampire blood." Penelope turned to stare at him. "You've been bleeding on my plant?" "Just a few drops every few days. It's traditional. Moonvein was used in healing rites, coronation ceremonies, peace treaties. The bloom only opens under moonlight, and the pollen can cure wounds that would otherwise be mortal, even for our kind. His fingers brushed the petals with infinite gentleness. I thought they were all gone. When I realized what you had, what you'd been keeping alive through sheer stubbornness and care. He stopped, and Penelope realized his hands were shaking. This matters, she said quietly, to your people. This plant. It's a piece of our history we thought we'd lost forever. He looked at her, and his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. You found it by accident, carried it home, kept it breathing for 3 years without knowing what it was. Do you understand how impossible that is? How precious? She did understand, actually. She'd spent her whole life studying plants, documenting their properties, fighting to preserve species on the edge of extinction. She knew exactly what it meant to hold the last of something in your hands. If I'd known, she said slowly. If I'd published my findings about where I found it, others would have come looking. Others who wouldn't be as careful as you. His voice went hard. There are vampires who believe Moonvein should belong only to the old bloodlines, the pure families. They've killed for less. Is that why you had guards in my apartment? You weren't just watching my plants. I was protecting all of it. You, your home, every living thing under your care. But yes, once I realized what the Moonvein was, I knew others might come looking. He straightened, slipping back into that formal posture. I've had scouts monitoring the building since the first week. No one's approached, but... The window shattered. Quillan moved faster than thought, dragging Penelope down behind the table as glass rained across the floor. She hit the ground hard, his body covering hers, and heard voices shouting in a language she didn't recognize. "Stay down," Quillan said, his voice gone cold and sharp. "No matter what happens, stay down." He was up and moving before she could respond, facing the window where 3 figures climbed through the broken frame. They were vampire pale, like him, but there was nothing elegant about them. They moved like predators, like hunters, and their eyes fixed on the Moonvein with naked hunger. "Lord Quillan," the lead figure said, a woman with scars across her face and hands that ended in claws. "Step aside. The Moonvein belongs to the Bloodright Council." "The Moonvein belongs to Miss Everhart," Quillan said, and his voice carried an authority that made the air feel heavy. "As does this home, these plants, and every living thing within these walls. You're trespassing." "You abdicated your crown to the council," the woman hissed. "You have no authority here." "I abdicated nothing. I stepped back. There's a difference." He smiled, and it was nothing like the warm expression Penelope had seen earlier. This smile was all edges. "And you'll find I still have enough authority to remove you from this place, violently if necessary." The woman's claws extended further. "There are 3 of us." "Yes," Quillan agreed. "That does seem unfair. Would you like to call for reinforcements?" They attacked. Penelope had never seen vampires fight before. She'd never seen vampires at all before tonight, really, and the speed of it was impossible to track. Quillan moved like water, like shadow, always exactly where he needed to be. One attacker lunged for him and found only air. Another went for the Moonvein and met Quillan's fist with bone-cracking force. The third tried to circle behind, and Quillan caught her by the throat, slamming her into the wall hard enough to crack plaster. "I told you," he said calmly, not even breathing hard. "Everything in these walls is under my protection." The scarred woman pulled herself to her feet, blood on her mouth. "The council won't. The council will do exactly what I tell them," Quillan said, and his voice dropped to something dark and absolute. "Because I am still Quillan Quillan, and I am still their king, crown or no crown. Go back and tell them that. Tell them the Moonvein is claimed, protected, and not for sale or trade or theft. Tell them if they want it, they'll have to go through me." The 3 vampires looked at each other. Then, slowly, they retreated through the window and disappeared into the night. Quillan stood still for a moment, his shoulders tight. Then he turned, and his face flooded with concern. "Are you hurt?" Penelope realized she was still on the floor, pressed against the side of the table, her heart pounding. "I'm fine. Are you?" He crossed to her in 2 strides, dropping into a crouch, his hands hovering over her like he didn't dare touch. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to bring danger to your door. I thought I'd been careful enough, but you just fought off 3 vampires to protect a plant. To protect you, he corrected quietly. The plant is precious, yes, but you... He stopped, something shifting in his expression. You're the one who kept it alive when it should have died. You're the one who found it and carried it home and refused to give up on it. You matter more than any flower. Her breath caught. We just met. I know. He smiled, rueful and soft. I'm aware that makes me sound insane. But I've lived a very long time, Miss Everhart, and I've learned to recognize something worth protecting when I find it. She should be afraid. She should run. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, feeling how cold his skin was, how steady his grip. Penelope, she said. If we're going to do this, whatever this is, you should probably call me Penelope. His fingers tightened around hers. Penelope, he repeated, like he was tasting the name. Then you should call me Quillan. Just Quillan. Just Quillan the Vampire King? Former Vampire King, he corrected, currently just a very dedicated plant sitter. She laughed, because what else could she do? And his expression went warm again, that real smile returning. We need to figure out what to do about the moon vein, she said. If the council wants it, they can't have it. His voice was firm. But you're right. We need a plan. One that doesn't involve me fighting off assassins every other night. They moved back to her apartment, Quillan carrying the moon vein with careful hands while Penelope grabbed her research notes. The other vampires had cleaned up the broken glass and disappeared, leaving behind only the sophisticated monitoring equipment and a note in elegant script that said, His Majesty will explain. We remain at your service. I like Seraphine, Penelope said, reading the note. She seems nice. She's my oldest friend and an absolute menace, Quillan said, but there was affection in his voice. She's also right. I owe you a much longer explanation about what I am, what I was, and what I'm trying to be. So he told her. He sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by her forest of plants, and explained about the courts and councils, the bloodlines and politics, the weight of wearing a crown for 600 years. He told her about the wars he'd fought and the peace he'd brokered, and the day he'd walked away from it all because he couldn't remember the last time he'd done something simple, something human, something that mattered on a scale smaller than kingdoms. I thought I wanted quiet, he said, staring at his hands. I thought I wanted to be alone. And then you knocked on my door asking me to care for your plants, and it was the first time in centuries someone had treated me like a person instead of a symbol. You didn't want a king. You just wanted someone you could trust. I still trust you, Penelope said, and meant it, even though you turned my apartment into a botanical fortress. Even though I'm a vampire? Even though you're a vampire king who apparently bleeds on rare plants and fights off assassins in formal wear. He laughed, and the sound was lighter than she expected, almost boyish. When you say it like that, I sound ridiculous. You are ridiculous, she said gently. You're also the most dedicated caretaker I've ever met, and you gave my plants grow lights, and you just risked your life to protect something I care about. So yes, I still trust you. Quillan looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached across the table and took her hand again, his thumb brushing against her knuckles. I want to help you with this, he said quietly. The moon vein. I know your work is about preserving medicinal plants, documenting their properties, making sure they survive. We could do that together. We could cultivate it, propagate it, make sure it never becomes scarce enough to fight over again. You'd do that? Share it with the world? I'd do it with you, he said, and his voice held that formal gravity again, like a promise. If you'll have me. She should think about it, should consider the implications, the complications, the absolute insanity of partnering with a vampire king on a botanical project. Instead, she turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. Okay, she said, let's save a plant. They worked through the night, Penelope documenting the moon vein's properties while Quillan explained its traditional uses in vampire medicine. He was right, the pollen had extraordinary healing properties, capable of closing wounds that would otherwise be fatal. But more than that, the plant was adaptable, capable of growing in varied conditions if given the right care. If we could cultivate it in different environments, Penelope said, sketching diagrams, we could distribute it to multiple locations. No single group could monopolize it. We'd need secure growing sites, Quillan added, Places protected from those who'd rather see it remain rare. We'd need expertise, other botanists, conservationists who understand what they're working with. I know people, Quillan said. Vampires who've been trying to recover lost species for decades. They'd help, if I asked. They built plans until dawn approached, and Quillan glanced at the windows with obvious reluctance. I need to go before the sun rises, but I'll be back tonight and we can wait. Penelope stood, sudden realization hitting her. You've been staying up all night every night for 5 weeks, watching my plants. Someone had to monitor the nocturnal growth cycles. You need rest. I'm a vampire. We don't need much. Quillan? She crossed to him, reaching up to touch his face, feeling the cool skin and sharp bones. Thank you. For everything. For caring. For protecting. For taking me seriously. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. It's easy to take you seriously, Penelope. You care about things the way I used to, before I got old and tired. You remind me why it matters. She kissed him. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it, just rose on her toes and pressed her mouth to his. He froze for half a heartbeat, and then his hands came up to frame her face, and he kissed her back with the kind of careful intensity that made her forget how to breathe. When they finally broke apart, his forehead rested against hers, and his voice was rough. That was probably stupid, she finished. I was going to say wonderful. Oh, she smiled against his mouth. That too. I need to go, he said, but he didn't move. The sun. Tonight then. Come back tonight and we'll keep planning. I'll bring Seraphine. And Dorian, he's the best botanist in my court. And Quillan. She kissed him again, soft and quick. Just come back. His smile was radiant. I promise. He left as the first light touched the sky, and Penelope stood in her apartment full of thriving plants and sophisticated equipment, trying to process everything that had happened. She'd left for a botanical expedition and come home to find a vampire king had turned her windowsill garden into a protected sanctuary. She should be overwhelmed, terrified even. Instead, she felt like laughing. Her phone buzzed a text from an unknown number in elegant script. Your begonias needed water. I took the liberty before I left. Sleep well. Q. She was definitely in trouble. Over the next 2 weeks, her apartment became command central for what Quillan cheerfully called Project Moonvein. Seraphine arrived with ancient texts about vampire healing practices. Dorian brought soil samples and propagation equipment. A steady stream of other vampires filtered through, each contributing expertise, historians, botanists, even a former monk who remembered the original Moonvein gardens from before they were destroyed. Penelope coordinated it all, her background in conservation biology finally getting the respect it deserved. She worked with vampire scholars who'd been studying plants for centuries, learning techniques that had been lost to human knowledge. They taught her about blood-feeding practices for certain species, nocturnal growth patterns, the way some plants responded to vampire presence itself. And through it all, Quillan was there steady, devoted, impossibly focused. He treated the project with the same intensity he'd brought to guarding her spider plants, which meant he treated it like the most important thing in the world. You're doing it again, Penelope said one night, finding him measuring the Moonvein stem growth with precision instruments. Doing what? Obsessing. He looked up, unrepentant. It grew a 1/4 inch since yesterday. That's significant. It's a plant. They grow. This plant is the future of vampire medicine and possibly cross-species botanical cooperation. Its growth rate directly impacts our propagation timeline. She crossed to him, plucking the calipers from his hand. Take a break. I don't need Quillan. She pointed to the couch. Sit. He sat, looking distinctly uncomfortable with the forced inactivity. Penelope settled beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, and felt him gradually relax. Tell me something, she said. Something that's not about plants or politics or saving the world. He was quiet for a moment. What would you like to know? What made you happy? Before you were king, before everything got complicated. What did you love? His expression went distant. Gardens, he said softly. My mother kept gardens. Herbs mostly, for cooking and medicine. I used to help her tend them. She taught me to recognize each plant by touch, by scent. by the way their leaves caught the light. His mouth curved. I was very young, still human. I thought I'd be a gardener when I grew up. What happened? I died, he said simply. Or nearly died. A war came through our village. I was turned to save my life, and suddenly I had eternity stretched ahead of me and no idea what to do with it. I became a king by accident. Really, someone needed to organize the refugees, negotiate with the other territories. I was good at it, so I kept doing it. For 600 years. But you never forgot the gardens? No. He looked at her and his eyes were soft. I never forgot. I just convinced myself I didn't deserve them anymore, that I'd grown too far from that boy who wanted to dig in the dirt. Penelope took his hand, turning it over to trace the long, pale fingers. You literally built a greenhouse for my desert roses. That's different. It's not different. You're still that person, Quillan. You just forgot for a while. He stared at their joined hands, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. I don't know how to do this, any of this. I've commanded armies and brokered treaties, but I don't know how to just be with someone who matters. I matter? You terrify me? He said honestly. You and your ridiculous trust and your plants that you love like children and your absolute certainty that the world can be saved one species at a time. You make me want to believe in things again. Her throat tightened. Is that bad? It's the best thing that's happened to me in 800 years. She kissed him then, slow and deep, and he responded like he was drowning and she was air. His hands tangled in her hair, and hers slid under his jacket, feeling the cool skin and lean muscle beneath. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes had gone black with want. Penelope, he said, half warning, half plea. Stay, she whispered, not to work on the project, not to guard the plants, just stay. He did. They made love on her couch, surrounded by the forest she'd built and the equipment he'd installed, and it was nothing like Penelope expected. He was careful, almost reverent, touching her like she was something precious. She'd expected vampire strength, supernatural intensity. What she got was tenderness, his hands learning her body with the same focused attention he gave to her plants, his mouth tracing patterns that made her forget her own name. Afterward, she lay against his chest, his arms wrapped around her, and listened to the absence of a heartbeat. Does it bother you? He asked quietly. That I'm not alive the way you are? Are you not alive? She tilted her head to look at him. You feel pretty alive to me. I don't age, don't change. Everything around me grows and dies, and I just remain. Maybe that's the point, she said softly. Maybe you remain so you can witness it, so you can remember what was and protect what is. There's value in that, Quillan. There's purpose. His arms tightened around her. How are you real? Same way you are, one day at a time. He laughed, and the sound was full of wonder. They slept until dusk, or rather, Penelope slept while Quillan held her, apparently content to lie still and watch her breathe. When she woke, he was tracing patterns on her shoulder, his expression distant. What are you thinking about? She murmured. The council, he said. They'll make another move soon. The stolen moon vein attempt was just a test. They'll come with more force next time. Penelope sat up, suddenly cold. How many vampires are we talking about? Potentially dozens. The Bloodright Council controls most of the old families. They have resources, soldiers, influence. He met her eyes. If they decide the moon vein is worth a war, I can't stop them alone. So we don't face them alone. She reached for her phone. I know people too. Conservation networks, botanical societies, researchers who understand what this plant means. If we make it public documented, share the findings, distribute growing samples, they can't suppress it. That's dangerous, Quillan said slowly. For you. Once you publish, you'll be a target. I'm already a target. At least this way, the knowledge survives even if… She stopped, not wanting to finish that thought. His face went hard. Nothing will happen to you. I won't allow it. You can't promise that. I can promise I'll burn the world down before I let them hurt you, he said, and his voice carried absolute conviction. I've spent 8 centuries being diplomatic, measured, reasonable. I'm done with that. If they want a war over a plant, I'll give them a war they'll remember for the next millennium. She should be frightened by the cold fury in his voice. Instead, she felt safe. Okay, she said. Then let's make sure they can't win. Let's make the moon vein so abundant, so widely distributed, that destroying it becomes impossible. They spent the next week working at a frantic pace, Penelope documenting every aspect of the moon vein's biology while Quillan coordinated with his contacts across the vampire world. They propagated cuttings, created growing protocols, packaged seeds. Seraphine handled security while Dorian managed the cultivation process, and slowly their small project grew into something larger. Other vampires began arriving, not just Quillan's allies, but neutral parties, scholars, even a few from the Blood-Right Council itself who disagreed with their leadership's hoarding philosophy. They brought resources, expertise, and most importantly, safe locations to grow the moon vein across multiple territories. "We're creating a network," Quillan explained one night, showing Penelope a map covered in pins. "Each growing site independent but connected. If the council destroys one, 20 more remain. It's not a resource anymore, it's a legacy." "How long until we can distribute it widely?" 6 months, maybe less. Dorian says the cuttings are taking faster than expected. The moon vein wants to survive. "Plants usually do," Penelope said. "We just have to give them the chance." The attack came on the 43rd day. Penelope was in her apartment, packaging seeds for shipment, when Quillan burst through the door with blood on his collar. "They're here. 20 soldiers, maybe more. We need to move you now." "The moon vein is already gone. Seraphine evacuated the specimens an hour ago, but you need to come with me." She grabbed her research notes and let him pull her into the hallway, where 4 of his vampires waited with grim expressions. They moved fast, descending service stairs while sounds of fighting echoed above them. Glass shattered. Someone screamed. "Where are we going?" Penelope gasped. "Somewhere safe, somewhere they can't follow." They emerged in the building's basement, and Quillan pressed his hand against what looked like a solid wall. Stone ground against stone, and a doorway appeared, leading to a tunnel that shouldn't exist. "Secret passage?" Penelope managed. "Old city infrastructure. These tunnels run under half of downtown." He ushered her through, and his vampires followed, sealing the entrance behind them. "Stay close to me." They moved through darkness lit by handheld lights, the tunnel walls close and damp. Behind them, Penelope heard pursuit footsteps echoing, voices calling in that same language she didn't recognize. "They're following," she said. "I know," Quillan's voice was grim. "Seraphine, take Miss Everhart ahead, get her to the sanctuary." "No," Penelope said. "I'm not leaving you to fight them alone." "This isn't negotiable." "Actually, it is." She stopped walking, forcing him to stop too. "You said I matter. You said you'd protect me. Well, I'm saying you matter to me too, and I'm not abandoning you just to save myself." His expression went through several emotions: frustration, fear, and finally something like awe. "You're the most stubborn human I've ever met." "Good thing you like stubborn." He kissed her hard, desperate, then pulled back. "Stay behind me. No matter what happens, stay behind me." The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, some kind of old cistern with vaulted ceilings and standing water. Quillan positioned his vampires at defensive points while Penelope pressed herself against the far wall, clutching her research notes. The council soldiers poured in like a flood. This fight was nothing like the skirmish in Quillan's apartment. This was war, brutal, fast, absolute. Quillan moved like death itself, and his vampires fought with coordinated precision. But there were too many attackers, and they kept coming. Penelope watched Quillan take a blade to the shoulder and keep fighting. Watched Seraphine go down and force herself back up. Watched the careful control slip from Quillan's face, replaced by something ancient and terrible. "Enough," he said, and his voice carried power that made the water ripple. "I am Quillan, and I'm still your king. Stand down." Some of the soldiers hesitated, others pressed forward, and Quillan's expression went cold. "I tried mercy," he said quietly. "Remember that you made this choice." What happened next would haunt Penelope's dreams for months. Quillan stopped holding back, stopped pulling his strikes, stopped being the careful diplomat who'd watered her plants with scientific precision. He became what he'd been for 600 years, a king who'd earned his crown through combat, who'd survived centuries of challenges, who'd built an empire on the understanding that some lines could not be crossed. When it was over, the council soldiers fled, and Quillan stood in the center of the cistern with blood on his hands and murder in his eyes. "Quillan," Penelope said softly. He turned, and for a moment she saw something inhuman looking back at her. Then recognition flooded his face, and he crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands hovering over her like he didn't dare touch. "Are you hurt?" His voice was raw. "I'm fine, but you're—" She reached for his shoulder, where blood soaked through his shirt. "It'll heal." He caught her hand, pressing it against his chest where his heart didn't beat. "I'm sorry you had to see me like that." "Like what? Protecting people you care about? Fighting for something that matters?" She moved closer, ignoring the blood and the violence and the fear. "I'm not afraid of you, Quillan." "You should be. I'm a monster. You're a person who's lived too long and fought too hard and forgotten how to be gentle with himself." She touched his face, feeling him tremble under her hands. "But you learned again. You learned with my plants. You learned with me." He pulled her against him, holding her like she might disappear. "I can't lose you. I can't watch another thing I love die." "Then don't." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Make me like you." The cistern went silent. Every vampire froze, staring at her. "What?" Quillan whispered. "Turn me," Penelope said clearly. "I've been thinking about it since the night you told me what you were. I'm 28 years old, and I've spent my whole adult life studying how to save plants that are dying. Imagine what I could do with centuries. Imagine what we could do together." "Penelope." "I want this," she said firmly. "Not because I'm afraid to die, not because I'm caught up in the romance of it. I want this because I've finally found work that matters and a person who sees me, and I want more time. I want enough time to plant forests and watch them grow. I want enough time to save every endangered species on the planet. I want enough time to love you properly." Quillan's face crumpled. "It hurts. The turning. It's agony. And there's no guarantee you'll survive, and even if you do, you'll lose everything warm about yourself." "I'll lose the ability to see sunlight and eat solid food," Penelope corrected. "I'll keep everything else, my work, my purpose, my care for green-growing things, and I'll gain time. That's worth the trade." "You can't know that." "I do know that." She took his bloodied hands in hers. "I've spent 5 years watching plants go extinct because there isn't enough time to save them. I've published papers, knowing I'll never see the results of my recommendations. I've planted trees I'll never see mature. That's what humans do. We start things we can't finish, but you don't have to. You can see consequences. You can witness change. That's a gift, Quillan, not a curse." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Seraphine, who'd been watching with an unreadable expression. "Tell her," he said roughly. "Tell her what she's asking for." Seraphine stepped forward, her silver hair stained with blood. "It will hurt more than anything you've experienced. You'll die, briefly, and then wake up different, stronger, faster, colder. You'll need to feed, and the hunger is terrible at first. You'll have to learn control, and you might hurt people while you're learning. But I'll survive? If your body accepts the change, yes, most do, but some don't. It's a risk." Penelope looked at Quillan. "What are the odds?" 90% survival rate, he said quietly. "But that 10% is worth the risk," she finished. "Do it." "Penelope? Do it now before I lose my nerve and before the council comes back with reinforcements?" He pulled her into a corner of the cistern, away from the others, and his hands were shaking. "Are you absolutely certain?" "Yes." "If something goes wrong?" "Then I tried. That's more than most people get." He kissed her, soft and desperate, and when he pulled back his eyes were black. "I love you," he said. "I should have said it sooner, but I love you. You and your stubborn trust and your ridiculous devotion to small growing things. You make me remember why immortality might be worth it." "I love you too," Penelope whispered. "Now bite me before I start crying." He did. The pain was exactly as terrible as advertised. His teeth broke her skin, and fire poured through her veins, burning everything it touched. She felt her heart stutter, felt her lungs seize, felt herself dying by inches, and then she felt his blood on her tongue, and something in her body recognized it, welcomed it, pulled it deeper. The transformation took 3 days. Penelope was aware of very little pain, mostly. and Quillan's voice reading to her in languages she didn't recognize, and the feeling of cool hands holding hers. Once, she heard Seraphine say, "She's strong. She'll make it." Once, she heard Dorian say, "The moon vein cuttings are thriving. She'll want to know that." Once, she heard Quillan say, "Please don't leave me. Please." She woke in darkness, in a room that smelled like stone and earth, and knew immediately that she'd survived. Everything was different. Her vision was sharper, her hearing more acute. She could feel the air moving against her skin, could smell old blood and new growth, and the mineral scent of underground water. And she was cold, not uncomfortably, but noticeably, like her body had forgotten how to generate heat. "Penelope?" She turned toward the voice and found Quillan sitting beside the bed, looking exhausted and terrified and hopeful. In the darkness, she could see imperfectly every detail of his face, the concern in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "Hi," she said, and her voice sounded wrong, lower and clearer. He made a sound between a laugh and a sob, pulling her into his arms. "You're alive. You're here. I was so afraid." "I'm okay." She held him back, feeling the strength in her new body, the way she could match his grip now. "I'm more than okay. She paused, searching for words. "I'm different." "Are you in pain?" "No, I'm hungry, though." He pulled back, studying her face. "Hungry like you need food, or hungry like you need blood?" "Definitely the second one." He produced a flask from his pocket, something dark and rich inside. "Animal blood, to start. Until you learn control. Drink slowly." She did, and the taste was strange, but not unpleasant, and the hunger faded. When she finished, Quillan was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked. "You're beautiful," he said quietly. "You were beautiful before, but now—" He touched her face gently. "Your eyes are darker. Your skin is paler. But you're still you. I can see you in there." "How long was I out?" 3 days. The council declared open war on the 4th hour. We've been defending your growing sites ever since." Penelope sat up, suddenly alert. "The moon vein is safe, all of it. We distributed the cuttings before they could organize a full assault, and now there are specimens in 43 locations across 6 territories. They can't destroy it anymore without declaring war on half the vampire world." "So we won." "We survived," Quillan corrected. "The council's demanding negotiation. They want you to stand trial for theft of vampire property." "That's ridiculous. I found that plant 3 years ago." "I know, everyone knows, but they need to save face somehow." He took her hand. "Which is why we're going to give them exactly what they want." "A trial?" "A summit." His smile was sharp. "You're going to stand before the Blood Right Council and explain exactly what the moon vein is, what it can do, and why hoarding it would be a catastrophic mistake. And I'm going to stand beside you as your advocate and remind them that I may have stepped back from leadership, but I never stopped being their king." "That sounds terrifying." "It will be." He squeezed her hand. "But you've already done the hard part. You've kept a dying plant alive for 3 years. You've built a network of conservationists who understand its value. You've survived transformation into a vampire. Speaking to a council of old monsters should be easy by comparison. You have a very skewed sense of easy. One of my many flaws." She laughed, and it felt good, felt human despite everything that had changed. "When is this summit?" 3 weeks. Enough time for you to learn basic control and for me to call in every favor I'm owed." His expression went serious. "You don't have to do this, Penelope. We could disappear, hide, let the moon vein network operate without you." "No," she said it firmly. "I didn't become immortal to run and hide. I became immortal to finish what I started. Let's go talk to your council." The 3 weeks passed in a blur of training. Penelope learned to control her new strength, her new speed, the way her body responded to blood and darkness. Seraphine taught her combat basics, insisting that anyone facing the council needed to know how to defend themselves. Dorian taught her vampire etiquette, the complex rules of address and hierarchy that governed interactions. And Quillan taught her everything else, how to move through crowds without attracting attention, how to read the political currents in a room, how to present information in a way that made proud ancient creatures actually listen. They'll try to intimidate you, he said one night, watching her practice a presentation. They'll use their age, their power, their certainty that they know better than a fledgling vampire who was human 3 weeks ago. Don't let them. How? Remember that you've already won. The moon vein exists in dozens of locations. It's documented, studied, shared. They can kill you, but they can't suppress the knowledge anymore. That makes you dangerous, and they respect danger. You really think I can do this? He crossed to her, tilting her chin up to meet his eyes. I think you kept an extinct plant alive through sheer stubbornness and care. I think you convinced a cynical vampire king to believe in small growing things again. I think you survived transformation because you were too stubborn to die. Yes, Penelope. I think you can do this. She kissed him, long and slow, feeling the way he responded to her now that she had vampire strength and speed. When they broke apart, both were breathing harder than necessary. What happens after the summit? She asked. If we survive. We build our sanctuary, Quillan said. The one we've been planning. A place where endangered plants can grow safely, where humans and vampires can work together on conservation. We plant forests and watch them mature. We save everything we can. Together? Together, he agreed, for as long as you'll have me. That's going to be a very long time. I certainly hope so. The summit was held in an underground complex beneath the city, a vast space of stone and ancient architecture that predated modern construction by centuries. The Bloodright Council assembled in a circular chamber, 12 vampires so old their skin looked translucent, their eyes black as night. Penelope stood in the center of the circle, Quillan at her side, and tried not to think about how many ways this could go wrong. The eldest council member spoke first, a woman whose white hair fell to the floor and whose voice sounded like grinding stone. Penelope Everhart, you stand accused of theft, distribution of sacred vampire property, and disruption of established blood law. How do you plead? Not guilty, Penelope said clearly, on all counts. You admit to taking the moon vein from its sacred growing place. I found a plant growing wild in abandoned ruins. I documented it, kept it alive, and attempted to understand its properties. That's not theft, that's science. You admit to distributing specimens without council approval. I shared a plant that was dying out with people who could help it thrive. That's not distribution of property, that's conservation. You admit to transforming yourself into a vampire to escape human law. I chose transformation to gain the time necessary to complete my work, Penelope said. That's not escape, that's commitment. The chamber went silent. Several council members looked at Quillan, who stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. You advocate for her, Lord Quillan? The eldest asked. I advocate for reason, Quillan said calmly. Miss Everhart has accomplished what we could, not she's ensured the moon vein will survive and thrive for future generations. She's built a network of conservationists, both human and vampire, who understand its value. She's done more in 3 years than we've managed in 3 centuries. Perhaps instead of punishing her, we should be thanking her. She's a fledgling, another council member hissed. She has no right to dictate policy. She has every right, Quillan interrupted, and his voice carried an edge now. She's the one who kept the moon vein alive when it should have gone extinct. She's the one who recognized its value and protected it. And she's the one standing here willing to share it freely, while you sit in your stone seats trying to decide who deserves access to healing. You dare lecture the council? I dare remind you that I founded this council, Quillan said, and power rippled through his voice. I organized the first blood laws. I negotiated the territorial agreements. I built the framework you still use to govern. I stepped back because I was tired, not because I was weak. Don't make me remember why I was king for 600 years. The chamber went very quiet. Penelope stepped forward. I don't want to fight, she said. I want cooperation. The moon vein is valuable, yes, but it's more valuable if it's abundant. We could heal vampires who've been suffering for centuries. We could create peace offerings, diplomatic gifts, trade agreements. We could prove that conservation benefits everyone, not just the powerful. And if we refuse? The eldest asked. Then you'll watch the moon vein thrive without you, Penelope said simply. It's already growing in 43 locations. It's already being studied, documented, shared. You can be part of that legacy, Or you can be remembered as the ones who tried to hoard healing while people suffered. The council members looked at each other, silent communication passing between them. Finally, the eldest spoke. We require access to your research. Complete documentation of the moon vein's properties, cultivation requirements, and medicinal applications. Done, Penelope agreed. We require input on distribution protocols. The council must approve all new growing sites. Approved, as long as you actually review proposals in a reasonable time frame and don't use approval as a veto. We require regular reports on the moon vein status and distribution. I can do quarterly reports, more often if something significant happens. The eldest vampire studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. You bargain like someone who knows she's already won. I learned from the best, Penelope said, glancing at Quillan. Very well, the charges are dismissed. You may continue your work, Miss Everhart, with the council's acknowledgement, if not quite their blessing. The eldest paused, though I suspect we'll come to regret not recruiting you properly. You would have made an interesting addition to vampire politics. I'm not interested in politics, Penelope said. I'm interested in plants. Of course you are. The eldest waved a hand. You're dismissed, both of you. Quillan took Penelope's hand and led her from the chamber, and neither of them spoke until they were back in the tunnels, away from the council's hearing. Then Penelope burst out laughing. I can't believe that worked, she said, leaning against the stone wall. I can't believe they actually listened. You gave them a way to save face while accepting the inevitable, Quillan said. That's all politics is, finding the path where everyone gets to claim victory. Is that what you did for 600 years? More or less. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. You were magnificent, fierce and reasonable and absolutely unshakable. I was terrified and proud in equal measure. I was terrified the whole time. I know, that's what made it impressive. She kissed him, and he responded with the kind of intensity that suggested he'd been holding back during the summit. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. So what now? Penelope asked. Now we build our sanctuary, Quillan said. I know a place-old estate, abandoned for decades, with greenhouses and gardens that just need restoration. We could make it beautiful, Penelope. We could make it matter. Show me. They emerged from the underground complex as night fell, and Quillan led her through the city to its outskirts, where old estates crumbled behind iron gates. One in particular caught Penelope's eye, a sprawling property with broken greenhouses glinting in the moonlight and wild gardens spreading unchecked. It's perfect, she breathed. It needs work, Quillan warned. Years of work, probably. The infrastructure is intact, but everything's overgrown. We'd have to clear, replant, rebuild. I have time now, Penelope said. We both do. He smiled, and it was the warmest expression she'd seen on his face. Then let's get started. They worked through the night, and through 100 nights after that. Seraphine and Dorian joined them, and slowly others followed, vampires interested in conservation, humans who'd heard about the Moon Vein Project, scholars and gardeners and people who just wanted to be part of something that mattered. The sanctuary grew slowly, carefully, exactly the way Penelope had always believed important things should grow. They restored the greenhouses, cleared the gardens, planted specimens from around the world. The moon vein thrived in its dedicated section, blooming under moonlight, its pollen carefully harvested and distributed to those who needed healing. Penelope published her research, collaborated with universities, gave lectures to mixed audiences of humans and vampires. She became known in conservation circles as the woman who'd brought back an extinct species through sheer stubborn determination and cross-species cooperation. But mostly, she worked in the gardens with Quillan at her side, their hands in the soil, watching things grow. 5 years after the summit, they stood together in what had become the sanctuary's heart, a vast greenhouse where the moon vein grew in abundance, its pale flowers glowing softly in the darkness. Around them, dozens of other endangered species thrived in carefully maintained environments. Do you ever regret it? Quillan asked quietly. Giving up sunlight, regular food, everything human? No, Penelope said honestly. I regret that I can't share this with my family the way I'd like. I regret that I had to lie about why I disappeared. But the choice itself? Never. We could visit them, Quillan offered. If you wore contacts and stayed in shadow, they wouldn't know. Maybe someday, Penelope said, when I'm better at control. When I'm sure I won't accidentally break something with vampire strength or slip up about time periods I shouldn't remember. She leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. For now I have this, the sanctuary, the work, you, that's enough. Is it? His voice was soft, uncertain in a way it rarely was anymore. She turned to face him fully, taking both his hands. Quillan, I spent my human life racing against time, trying to save things before they disappeared. Now I have centuries to do it properly. I have the resources of your network, the knowledge of scholars who've been studying plants since before my great-grandparents were born, and I have you someone who understands why it matters and who'll work beside me every step of the way. Yes, it's enough. It's more than enough. He kissed her, soft and lingering, and when he pulled back his eyes were bright. I love you, he said. I love your dedication and your stubbornness and the way you look at a dying plant and see possibility. I love that you made me care again. I love that you trusted me with your forest. I love you too, Penelope said. I love that you guarded my plants like they were crown jewels. I love that you take everything seriously and commit completely and forget to be careful with your own heart. I love that you chose me. I'll keep choosing you, Quillan said, for as long as we exist. That's going to be a very, very long time. I'm counting on it. They stood together in the moon-veined garden, surrounded by life they'd cultivated, and Penelope felt something settle in her chest, not quite warmth, not anymore, but something better. Purpose, peace, the certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Do you ever think about what comes next? She asked, after we've saved all the endangered species we can, after the sanctuary is completely established? Quillan considered. I think we plant forests, he said slowly. Slow-growing ones, oaks and redwoods and trees that take centuries to mature. We plant them knowing we'll be here to see them reach their full size. We give the earth back some of what humanity's taken. I'd like that. And we keep learning, keep discovering. There are ecosystems we haven't explored, species we haven't documented, connections we haven't understood. We have time to study it all properly now. We could train others, Penelope added, warming to the idea. Create a program where young vampires learn conservation biology, give them purpose beyond just surviving, build a whole generation of immortals who dedicate themselves to protecting what's mortal. Quillan's smile was brilliant. Now you're thinking like a king. I thought you gave up being king. I did, but you... He touched her face gently. You're building something better than a kingdom. You're building a legacy that actually matters. They worked through the night, making plans, dreaming futures. And when dawn approached and they retreated to the sanctuary's underground quarters, they did so, knowing they'd wake to do it all again and again for as many nights as the world needed them. 10 years after Penelope's transformation, the sanctuary hosted its first International Conservation Summit. Researchers from 6 continents gathered to discuss endangered species protection. And for the first time in recorded history, the attendee list included both humans and vampires working as equals. Penelope gave the opening address, standing before a crowd of people who'd once thought cross-species cooperation was impossible. She talked about the moon vein, about the importance of sharing knowledge rather than hoarding it, about the value of long-term thinking and patient care. And when she finished, the applause was thunderous. Quillan watched from the side of the room, his expression proud and fond, and when she stepped down from the podium, he was there to take her hand. You're changing the world, he said quietly. We're changing the world, she corrected. Together. Together, he agreed. That night, after the summit attendees had dispersed and the sanctuary was quiet again, they walked through the gardens they'd built. Moonvein bloomed on every side, and between its pale flowers grew dozens of other species plants that had been on the edge of extinction, now thriving under careful protection. Do you remember when you knocked on my door at midnight? Quillan asked. Desperate and exhausted, asking me to water your plants? I remember thinking you were the strangest neighbor I'd ever had. I remember thinking you were the bravest human I'd met in a century, trusting a vampire you barely knew with something you loved. Best decision I ever made, Penelope said. Second best, Quillan corrected. The best was when you chose to stay. she smiled. I'm glad I stayed. So am I. They stood together in the garden they'd built, in the sanctuary they'd created, surrounded by life that existed because they'd cared enough to protect it. And somewhere in the greenhouse behind them, the moon vein bloomed eternal, a testament to the power of stubborn hope and devoted care. Years passed, decades. The sanctuary grew into an institution, then a movement. More sanctuaries opened across the globe, each dedicated to protecting endangered species and fostering cooperation between humans and vampires. Penelope's papers became required reading in conservation programs. Quillan's diplomatic approach became a model for cross-species negotiation. But through it all, they remained what they had always been, two people who'd found each other by accident and chosen each other on purpose, who'd built something beautiful from a simple request to water some plants. On their 50th anniversary, measured from the night Penelope had knocked on Quillan's door, they stood in the original greenhouse where the moon vein still bloomed. The plant had propagated beyond counting now, growing in sanctuaries and gardens and hospitals across the world, its healing properties available to anyone who needed them. 50 years, Penelope said softly. It feels like yesterday and forever ago. The best 50 years of my very long life, Quillan said, and we have centuries more ahead of us. What do you want to do with those centuries? He pulled her close, his arms secure around her. Exactly what we've been doing. Plant forests, save species, build sanctuaries, love you. He paused. Maybe travel more. There are places I haven't seen in centuries, ecosystems we haven't documented. We could explore together. I'd like that, Penelope said, though we'd need someone to watch the sanctuary while we're gone. Seraphine and Dorian are more than capable, and we've trained a dozen others who understand the work as well as we do. He smiled. We built something that can exist without us. That's how you know it matters. When do we leave? Whenever you're ready. She thought about the Amazon rainforest and its undocumented species, about the deep ocean ecosystems that even vampires hadn't fully explored, about mountain ranges and desert ecosystems and every wild place still fighting to survive. Soon, she said, but not yet. I want one more season here first, want to see the moon vein bloom one more time in the place where we started. Then we wait, Quillan agreed. I'm good at waiting. You really aren't, Penelope said, laughing. You're the least patient person I know. I'm patient about things that matter, and I matter. You matter more than anything else in this world or the next, he said seriously. You matter more than crowns or kingdoms or centuries of accumulated power. You matter because you're you, stubborn and dedicated and absolutely certain that the world can be saved one small life at a time. You make me believe it too. She kissed him, long and deep, and when they broke apart, the moon vein was blooming around them, its pale flowers glowing in the darkness like captured starlight. Thank you, Penelope said, for watering my plants. Thank you for trusting me with them, Quillan replied, for trusting me with your forest, your work, your life, for choosing to stay. I'll keep choosing you, Penelope said, for as long as we exist. That's going to be a very, very, very long time. I'm counting on it. They stood together in the garden they'd built from a simple act of trust, surrounded by life that bloomed because they'd cared enough to protect it. Outside, the world continued to turn. Forests grew at their patient pace, and endangered species fought to survive. But here, in this moment, in this sanctuary built on devotion and stubborn hope, two immortals who'd found each other by accident held each other close and planned for centuries yet to come. The moon vein bloomed eternal, and so would they.